Welcome, artists. We are going to learn about value and form shading all at once rolled into one using this worksheet. So first, you should always start by putting your name on your paper. You notice that you have a value scale built into the copy of the worksheet showing you even increases from light to medium to dark in about 5 steps. And we're going to use that when we are creating our scales. So on section 1, there's a lot of information to look over first. We have a set of 5 boxes. We're going to practice some blending, a gradual change of smooth values using a pencil. So you need a regular old pencil, and sometimes having an eraser also helps. Our form on the right-hand side, this thing that has 6 sides, but we only see 3 of them in our 3D view here, is called a cube. So we're going to label it cube. Our light source is from above. So we have a tiny model of what we're going for. And then we also have a duplicate over here where we're going to be doing our own work. We're going to start by making the value scale, blending. Box 1 with a pencil should use like the side of your pencil, as light as you can possibly get it to go, but still have it show up. And what is important is that you don't leave it rough and scribbly like this, but you smooth it out. Fingers or tissues are fantastic for this. So if that one's smooth and even, and I can use my copy, although it's not always perfect at the top as a gauge, then I'm going to work my way up. What I like to do is jump to the 5th box. The 5th should be as dark as your pencil will allow you to go without tearing a hole in your paper. So I'm going to black that in, and then I'm going to work my way back through the middle, trying to make 5 even gradual steps and make each box evenly and solidly filled in. I also need to make sure that my edges are nice, so I clean those up when I'm done with my scale. And I should check my work and make sure that there's no 2 boxes that look very much the same, kind of like these 2. So you should revise. Pencil is additive and subtractive. Make improvements along the way until it is your best work, and you can be proud of what you've done. On the cube, you can see with the light directly above, the top would be the lightest. This showed up as white in the photocopy, but it should be like box 1 on the value scale. So very, very pale, because the light's directly above it. But when you're shading, you don't want to just leave things paper white. You want to consider what value they receive. And then really, if the light's directly above it, who's to say which side is medium and which side is dark? But I've chosen to make the small side the very dark one, because that would simply mean less work for me. So a smaller space that I have to black in, as black as I can possibly get, is going to be a little bit faster than a giant space the same way. So once that is done and looks good, that means my front square would be medium. When you're done with section 1, the scale, the label, and the shading of the form, you are ready to move on to section 2. In section 2, we have blending once again, a gradual change of smooth values. This time the material is a colored pencil. Our form on the right-hand side is right now a circle, but when shaded, it will be a sphere. That's S-P-H-E-R-E. And we have a model of what it will look like, obviously in black and white, but we will be using, once again, colored pencil. So I want you to just focus on one colored pencil. Like I know, for example, the sets might have a dark blue and a light blue, but that doesn't matter. Pick one and go with it. It's going to act exactly the same as black and white, but it's a different material, so you will find that it behaves in different ways. So I'm going to go ahead and shade my very light to my medium to my very dark. And you will notice that this colored pencil will not blend as smoothly and as evenly, or at all sometimes, as your actual pencil will. So you will have to work more with the pencil itself and or the eraser to get those smooth values. So once you feel like you have those nice 5 gradual even increases from light to medium to dark, you're going to move on to shading this sphere. The sphere is the hardest form to shade. I'm not going to lie to you one little bit. To get this circle to look like a 3D form, I want you to think of like the lines that you might see like on a beach ball or something else. And if your sunshine is up in the top right corner, the lightest point would be on the right-hand side. And then the other segments, those 5 steps of our value scale, would sort of spiral around it, notice in moon shapes. So when you begin shading opposite of the sun, the furthest away, you want to make like a box 5 very dark. Shading must have dark in order to look realistic. A lot of people go too light, and that's why their shading just looks like a pencil smudge. So very dark, and as you work in moon shapes up and away from that very dark edge, you're going to lighten up your pressure on your pencil, colored pencil in this case, and slowly begin to wrap this moon shape around the circle so it starts to almost meet on the other side. Notice I'm overlapping my strokes so I don't get one sense of direction. It's a sphere, so think about what lines would look like on that sphere, right? They're not going to be straight across like this because that's going to flatten your sphere. So have them go in a lot of directions. Make sure you get a teeny bit of shadow on that edge as it goes around away from you. Leave a little bright white highlight. And it should, let me even some of my spots up, start to look like a 3D sphere if you take a step back from it. So for section 2, you should have your value scale completed, your label of your sphere, and your shaded sphere using colored pencil. On to 3, one of my favorite techniques. We are going to learn about stippling, varying the density of randomly placed dots. It's very important. Our material here is a marker, so you can use a colored marker is actually best. Our form that we have present here is called a cone. And our light source is on the upper left this time, different from before. So stippling, you can see in the model here, is the dots used to show form. And it's sort of like dots that are used sometimes for coloring in comic books or things of that nature. Box 1 of stippling would be very widely spread, but random. Notice there's no rows, there's no columns, and they evenly fill up that space. And as you get further along, you're going to just decrease the space between each dot. Don't make lines like tick marks. You're going to have to go up and down with the marker tip to create those dots like circles. And try to make sure they are evenly spaced. So this is going to take me a minute. I'm going to keep working. I love stippling, but it is time consuming. So now we're going to shade this cone using some dots, randomly placed dots. When you shade a cone, you want to not shade it in stripes like this, but instead shade it in sections that are much like the skinniest pizza slices on the planet. So all along this left side would be very light, very few dots spread around. And that pizza slice would be wider at the bottom and skinnier at the top. And then I would work into my second box, more densely packed. So a little less space between them, still totally random. Don't make any lines that you have to erase later. And then I would work into my third right around the middle, much wider at the bottom, getting more densely packed and getting closer together, my little slice that I'm working on at the top. And then I would work into my fourth. And then my fifth along this outside edge. Notice they're not bigger dots, or I'm trying not to make them bigger dots and overlap. And they're not in rows and columns. They're all random and they're all careful and controlled, but there's a lot of them. So there's my shading of my big sphere, which maybe needs a little bit more development compared to my tiny model, but that's section 3, stippling on a cone with a marker. Moving on to section 4. We have hatching, which is varying the density of parallel lines. You can use a pencil or a pen for this, so I'm going to switch to pen. This time we are looking at this form here, which is called a pyramid. And our light source is on the upper right. We only see 2 faces of this pyramid. So as you can see from the model, these are parallel lines. They can be horizontally parallel, vertically parallel, or diagonally parallel. I kind of like diagonals. I find them quite comfortable for myself to draw. So in box 1, they might be very far apart. So it's like varying the density. See how they're not very close together. But in box 2, they would get even closer together. Notice sort of where they connect up on the edges. The trick, of course, is to draw them parallel and by hand. When you start to throw in the ruler, it doesn't look as believable, and it also is very time consuming. So make sure they go all the way to the edges, and as I get further along, you're going to see that I'm going to have more black space, more line, and I have white space left between them, and that's how you create this illusion of shading. If you feel that you're not very good at drawing straight lines, this would be a place to use pencil, so you can make corrections when necessary. But I've had a lot of practice, so I like my pen. All right, so as I say that, I make a mistake right here. Whoopsie. All right, so here's my model. The light is closest to the right-hand side. Therefore, my lines, which are going to run parallel to the bottom edge here, are going to be much more spread out. If you're particular, you could count how many are on the model and duplicate that. But I'm just going to spread them and try to make them stay parallel the whole way up to the tippity top. And then here they're going to be more densely packed. It's going to be darker. But who's to say exactly how dark it has to be? It's receiving less light than the other side, and having the 2 different values is going to create the contrast to show that 3D form. But there's no hard and fast rule on how dark or how light each one has to be. If we had a real life thing in front of us, we would use our real life model. Okay, on to our last section. So 4 is done. We have our scale, we labeled the name of the form, the pyramid, and we have shaded it using lines. So now we are on to section 5. Cross-hatching is varying the density of perpendicular lines. We can use pencil or pen. Our form here, it's like a cereal box laying down, would be a rectangular prism. And our light source is directly above this time instead of on the left or the right side. Your perpendicular means they cross at a 90-degree angle. They can cross horizontally and vertically, like so, or diagonals. That's trickier for a lot of people to do. So I'm going to show you horizontal and vertical, especially since I did diagonals on the last one. It'll be much like hatching, only you go back and cross hatch it. Try to make squares instead of a variety of different shapes, or it starts to look inconsistent. So by the time you get to the end, you see the white spaces between the lines would be tiny and the lines would be taking up most of the visual space. So on our rectangular prism, you can see the top is the lightest. So I'm going to run my lines parallel to the sides, which means straight across here, but then actually add an angle here. Because you have to imagine the perspective has made them tilt. If you don't tilt them, it really kind of ruins the illusion. And then I've picked this edge as the darkest because it's the smallest again. Who knows if the sunshine is directly above, which side would get more light or less light. But we need to have different values to create this illusion of depth. All right, so there we go. Section 5, I've got my cross-hatching scale. I've labeled the name of my form, and I have copied to the best of my ability the cross-hatching on the rectangular prism. So that's my whole value and form shading worksheet. And now I can show my great intelligence not only with blending, but other shading techniques and how to shade 3D forms.